Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we are going to push a little bit beyond just traditional 2D cel shading in Cinema 4D, and we're going to style it up a little bit. We're going to class it up. We're going to create some fun, noisy, grungy, stylized 2D cel shading in today's tutorial. So let's get started. This is what we're going to be creating here. We got this really cool, stylistic, noisy, grunged up kind of composition shading here, and this is a 3D object right here, as you can see. And I'm just going to show you how to break this down, and we're just going to start from scratch. Going to create a whole new composition. I'm going to go into my content browser. I'm going to grab from my newest Sketch and Toon pack version 4 that just came out. I'm just going to grab those sunglasses, so I'll just double click and I'll close this down and just look through the camera here. And let's go into interactive render region, because you can never see what the dang cel shader is doing without having interactive render region on. And let's bring this little triangle-y guy up to the top so we got full quality going on. And this is what our render looks like just straight out of the box from the Sketch and Toon pack. But what I'm going to do is just recreate the textures here all together. So I'm just going to go into my color here, my pink color, and just blow out whatever was there before. And I'm just going to work in the luminance channel here. I'm also just going to get rid of my light, because I want to start from scratch as well. So we got our camera. It's set to parallel. That's like a flat camera kind of view that makes everything in 3D look very flat. So that's very important. And we're just going to build our cel shader material. And I'm going to grab my cel shader from the Sketch and Toon menu. Boop, there we go. And by default, our camera is actually a light source. That's why you can see that the hottest or the brightest colors are coming straight from our view. So to change that, we just need to uncheck the camera and then turn on lights. But since we got rid of that light in our scene, we need to create a light. So let's go ahead and do that. Go into my light menu, and the light source I like to use is the infinite light. And that is because it's just a massively giant light source. It creates this nice flat lighting. And I'm also going to use ray trace hard shadows because we want nice and sharp shadows. And the thing about the infinite light is it doesn't matter where it's positioned in your scene. It's all about the angle. So what I'm going to do is just rotate my camera, or my light here, my infinite light. And you can see that that is the thing that's actually changing the angle of the light source. So I like that. I like we have this nice little highlight going on the top left. So now we can go back into our cel shader here and start messing with the colors. So we got 3 shades of blue. And I just want to change this back to that kind of hot pink, magenta-y kind of thing. It takes a man to use hot pink magenta in their 3D work. I'm just saying it, laying it out there. And we're just going to get some hot pink stuff going on. There we go. And that's looking good. Maybe get a little bit hotter there. It's getting hot in here with this hot pink. There we go. All right, so that's looking good. I'm digging that. So graininess. This is actually fairly simple. So we got these nice, sharp, cartoony, cel shaded type of stuff. But to add grain to our cel shader, it's actually very, very simple. We got 2 steps to do. First is to go into our bump channel and load up some noise. And right now, we just got to turn that on first. And you're going to see that actually nothing happens at all. What's going on here? Well, I'll tell you. We got to go into, to actually have our cel shader recognize the bump channel, we have to go into the cel shader, and we got this handy dandy option here called Use Bump. And all we need to do is say, hey, use that bump. And there we go. Now it looks all blobby. It's actually calculating the noise that we loaded up in our bump channel. So now we can actually adjust this, and you'll see it update in our viewport. So we can have this look very bumpy and kind of blobby-ish, which is, you know, that looks all well and good. But what I want to do is actually make this very noisy. So I'm just going to shrink the noise down. And I'm just going to go to the global scale and say, let's try 2. And that actually looks really, really good. We got this really nice grain going on, looking good. And that's just, adding noise and using the bump and just making sure we have this use bump checked on. But let's actually turn on some shadows. So right now we're only using the light. And even though by default I have the ray trace hard shadows turned on, we actually have to manually turn on the shadows because by default Cel Shader just comes in loaded up with it turned off. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on shadows. We can kind of see the difference here. You can kind of see it very subtly, especially right down here. You can see the shadows kind of activate. There we go. And one thing I like to do is we have the shadow options here. And right now it's just kind of set to multiply. And what I like to do is control the light color by actually using the light shadow. So what will happen is that will actually go black where all the shadows are being cast. The shadows go black, and that's because it's using, if I move this out of the way, it is using the actual color set in our shadow on our light. So to change the color, we can change it to maybe like a bluish, like dark blue, and you can see that updates. And it's actually taking the color from the color that we set in our light. So I always like to use that because then I can control the Cel Shader shadow color globally with my light. So that's all well and good. Actually, what I need to do now is this blue color. I actually need to load up a Cel Shader as well. So I'm just going to duplicate this blue color and just rename that glasses. And then since I already like the setup of what I have in my pink Cel Shader, I'm just going to copy that whole Cel Shader and just paste it. Do a little pasty doodle right there. And let me make sure that I apply that texture onto my lenses. So here's my lenses right here, these two discs. And I'm just going to go ahead and select those two blue materials and just switch it out with the glasses. And now it's that pink. And now I can actually go into my Cel Shader and start changing these colors to something a little bit more bluish, shall we? So let's go ahead and I can actually sample that original blue we had there. So that'll be the light color. And let's see, we need to actually load up a bump. So let me actually do that so we can have a little bump grainy action going on with our glasses. So let's just paste that bump, that noise in there. Go into luminance. Okay, that bump's turned on. Light shadow. Let's just bring these knots down and let's see what's going on. Actually, I know what's going on. What I need to do is these two guys are facing the wrong direction. So we're actually seeing the back side or like the shaded side. So I just need to go and do -Z. Boom. There we go. Now it's actually lit correctly. So that just a little maintenance I had to do there. And now we can go in here and start messing around and see how much of that grain kind of comes in here. And one important thing to know is with the bump, the strength kind of blurs the grain out. You can actually see that in our preview here. The stronger our bump strength, the more blurred out or scattered our noise is. So for the glasses, I just want a little bit. I don't want to see like all these specks like that. So maybe just a little bit like that. And again, we can also go, since everything is controlled by this light, we can adjust this as well. So that's looking good. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is finish this up and actually have some shadows being cast onto a background. So what I'm going to do is just create a floor. So I'll just create a plane and just move this down, and I'll kind of angle my parallel camera. We can see that because of the my parallel camera, everything kind of looks flat, and I always like to say it's like a SimCity kind of view. It really helps the illusion of forcing your object to look more geometric and therefore kind of flat. So we just remove any kind of camera distortion with the parallel projection versus perspective. You can definitely see some of that camera distortion or that depth distortion. So there we go. And you see that parallel just flattens it out all over again. So I just want a little bit of an angle so I can see the shadows there, right? And what I'll probably need to do is just kind of scale up my plane there. And there we go. And what I need to do is then apply a color to this this new floor, this plane. I'll just rename it floor. So we got everything all nice and neat, and make sure that it's just right below the glasses. So there we got that all set up. And so what I'm going to do is just duplicate the glasses cel shader material. I'll just rename this floor, and I'll just reuse this whole entire setup. Now, the thing with the floor is we're not going to use the bump or anything like that. We're actually just going to use these 2 shades of color. Let me apply this to the floor. And you're going to notice that the noise is kind of not working as expected or as we'd want it to. Sometimes we need to kind of adjust these knots to make sure we don't have any spill out. But you can see that we don't have any noise in our shadow. So what we're going to do, we're going to fix that. And the first thing I want to do is actually change the color of our background and our floor to something a little bit darker. Perhaps something like that. That looks good. Maybe desaturate that a little bit more. I'm just going to delete that knot and just make this a little bit darker. And something like that. And I don't even think we need another shade. So maybe we'll be good with just that. So now what I want to do is get rid of this whole black space right here. So what I'm going to do is create a background and then just duplicate this floor. This will be BKG. That will be our background texture. I'm just going to blow out the cel shader because we don't need any cel shading. We just need a solid color in here. Turn off the bump. And then we'll just apply that to the background to fill in that background space. And we'll recenter up there. All right, so these pain in the butt little shadows here. How do we get grain to show up in our shadows? We have it showing up on our cel shader, highlights and all of our little tritone colors here, but we need it on our light. Well, what happens with lights and how we can add grain to lights is we can actually use it as like a globo. And what that is it kind of, you can use a texture to kind of give texture to your light so it looks a little bit more natural. But what I'm going to do is actually use like a material with an alpha, with a noisy alpha, to then have it almost like blocking out, like act as a screen to my shadow. So let me actually stop talking and let me just actually show you what's going to go on. So I got my alpha, I'm going to turn it on. I am going to apply this to my light. Yes, you can apply materials to a light. And since everything's just black, it actually just alphas out and blows out our light. So remember, with an alpha, whatever's black does not show up, whatever's white does show up. So all we need to do is load up some noise on our texture. And we can actually just stay consistent here and just grab the same exact noise that we have loaded up in our cel shader materials and just paste that in to our alpha. And you can see, and it's very subtle, probably need to adjust the contrast here, but you can see that grain that now shows up in our shadow from our light just by applying a material with the alpha channel. And you can kind of see what's going on. It's almost like you put a piece of paper with holes in it onto a light, and you can then see that kind of the light peeking through the noise here and creating this kind of noisy kind of thing. You can see this even more if I bring this up 50%. You can see what I'm laying down here, what's going on there. So I'm just going to bring that global scale down to 0. But the thing is that, for certain looks, this could be cool. But for what I like to do, the look I like is that we actually have this shadow fade off and have some fall off. So, what we could do is go into our fall off, and you can see already that stuff's kind of janky, and I'm actually going to change this to linear because you can see all that funky stuff happening. I don't know what's going on there, but I think it plays more nice with linear. Yep. So what I'm going to do is just adjust the fall off, and you can see that kind of fades it out really nicely. And this works well when you're just dealing with one object, because again, if I go into my top view, you can see here's my light, here's my fall off. And what if we had multiple objects in our scene? Well, if it's beyond that fall off, that shadow is not going to show up, right? So this can work in certain situations, but not all. My second method for getting noisy shadows still involves using a texture let me open this up again, in the alpha channel on a light, but this time what we're gonna do is use some ambient occlusion. Now what's gonna happen is you can see that it's all, let me actually turn off image alpha. So we don't need image alpha, and that can kind of cause us some trouble. So what's going on, if you know how the ambient occlusion works, it applies shading when objects are close to each other. As you can see, our shadow, our light shadow, is only showing up where our objects are close together, like in here and definitely on the bottom here. And if I crank up the ray length to kind of spread that out a little bit more, you can see that we're seeing more of our shadow here. Well, this is kind of what we want. We want that fade off to happen not based on one single light and the lights fall off, but actually objects, distances from one another, and distances from this floor. Because if we had multiple objects here on the floor, this solution would actually be way better. But you can see that this isn't exactly grainy at all. It's just kind of a faded out a shadow that is not too unsimilar, dissimilar. I don't know. One of those is an actual word. Dissimilar, I think, from our actual light fall off option. So to actually introduce some grain to our ambient occlusion, we just have to bring down our samples here, right? And then once we do that, boom, we got some grain going on in our shadow. And since that the ambient occlusion's knocking out where our shadow actually shows up, this is our result. So it's acting like some noise, only because it's ambient occlusion, it's actually noise from the distance between two objects. So we can actually go in here and adjust the ray length again to make that a little closer, or we can make this even bigger so we can get longer shadows. We can adjust the color here. And you can see that because we did that, we actually got more darker colors showing up here, which actually looks pretty cool. And again, this is going to be very fast because we can turn down the accuracy, we can turn down the samples, and you can see that it just renders super, super fast as opposed to bringing up high samples in here. So that's basically it. We have our grain because of our little globo. And again, we can go into our light, and maybe we think that's a little bit too dark of a shadow. We can go into our color here. And again, since all of our cel shaded stuff is being controlled by the light color, we can adjust this very simply and easily. Maybe we want that. That kind of, actually that looks like garbage. So let's do like a purple. I like that a little bit better. Okay, so we just to recap, we have the AO kind of globo material that's applied to our light that has very low samples in our ambient occlusion, therefore causing this kind of grungy noise for our shadow. And then for our cel shader materials here to have grungy noise, we simply loaded in a noise channel to our bump channel, went into our cel shader, activated that use bump, and that kind of blurred everything out, and that created our grunginess on our cel shader. And one other thing is we're not limited to having like no interpolation or no blending between colors. We can actually introduce some smoothing between these colors, and you can see exactly what happens right away. If I just readjust these colors, we have more gradation between each shade of color. And you can see that, you know, stylistically, this is a lot different. And, you know, you could maybe like this or maybe not. But you can see that adding a little bit more color or a gradation between the shades, blurring between the shades, kind of adds a little bit more interesting look. So depending on what you're going for, and it still looks pretty dang 2D, right? So depending on what look you're going for, that is an option for you, right? All right, so let's do a little what did we learn today? Well, we learned how to use the use bump option and a little bit of noise to grain up our 2D cel shading. And then we discovered a few different ways that we can actually get that grunginess and apply it to shadows using little globo materials on our shadows and applying grain to our shadows through material, or by using your ambient occlusion and doing it that way. So hopefully you guys learned something. I'd really like to see what you guys come up with this nice little stylized grainy look. If you have any questions, ask me below. And if you liked this video, make sure you push the little likey button. Even if you're like, you know, it was alright, just like it anyways. I'd really very much appreciate it. Any likes I can get, I am very grateful. And if you like some of the stuff I've been doing, be sure to subscribe so you can keep up to date with all the crazy, wacky Cinema 4D tutorials that I come up with out of my brainium and for you guys to watch. So be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, and I would thank you very much for doing that. And I thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate all the views. I'll see all of you in the next tutorial real soon. Bye, everybody.